what attachment types do a lot of is it confuses the ability to manage something effectively with preference.
Oof.
Damn.
Oof. Attachment types tend to live accidentally, unconsciously from the outside in.
Its gift is to be flexible. Its gift is to be able to take on things that other types are too sensitive and honestly, too rigid to be able to handle.
There aren't really spaces, and our culture doesn't really train us to be able to witness each other in a way that can help our souls really emerge. Attachment types need that.
The big hormone enneagram.
I'm John Lekovich, 415, sexual self-pres, 458 Trifix.
I'm David Gray, self-pres sexual, 9 with 1 wing, 974 Trifix.
What up? It's Emeka. I'm an 8-wing-7, sexual self-pres with 854 fixes.
Hi, I'm Nancy. I'm a 3-wing-4 self-pres social, 369 Trifix.
Hi, I'm Alexandra. I'm a social self-preservation 9-wing-1, 963 Trifix.
If you like or hate us, make sure you go like and subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and make sure you leave us a review.
All right. So how's everyone doing?
Nobody cares, Alexandra.
I care. I care.
You're just doing social niceties. You don't care.
I'm trying to bond. Just fucking bond.
That's fake social self-pres bonding.
So full of shit. Okay.
You know
fine.
It's true.
You're
not asking real questions, Alexandra.
Oh my God.
Just going through the motions. You're just associating through social engagement.
Social. All right. Are you
Why
done?
don't you be real and show up as a real person?
Are you finished?
No, I'm not.
This is where you say, shut up, Emeka.
Yeah, for real. Just rejecting everything.
I just want more authenticity out of you. That's all.
All right. I'll remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right.
Attachment support group.
Group. Let's do a little intro. Big hormone enneagram. We are broadcasting live from our submersible, going to the depths of the attachment ocean. We have we're in this submersible all piled on top of each other that Emeka engineered. So it'll definitely stay together.
Oh.
We've got our, cabin boy David. We picked up a mermaid, Alexandra. And we've got the Prince Neptune of the ocean, Josh, with us to talk about the attachment waters.
It's beautiful.
That's so much. This is how I'd like to refer to from now on.
Yeah.
And we're using a Game Boy controller, right?
Yeah, we have a Nintendo Switch, and So
special trip to the afterlife.
Yeah. So before we pass over, please buy my book. Please rate and review my book. I might be doing an Egypt trip in January, so keep your ears out. And if you want to support me, most bookstores have an account with a company called Ingram, a distributor, and so please bother local book sellers to get my book in your store. I think that should work. I think that's it.
DAA, Dark Arts Academy. Do you want to become dangerously perceptive and skilled at seeing the types clearly? So it's been a summer of sexual instinct. That's all the people want to consume, I guess. So we've been pumping out episodes about pumping episodes out about sexual and all the different centers. We just did a class that people haven't stopped talking about social self-pres versus self-pres socials experience of the sexual blind spot.
Interesting.
And we looked at some examples of how differently that's the sexual blind spot would be experienced depending on whether you're social self-pres or self-pres social. What else? We just wrapped up the heart center, and it seems like people want one more about the blind spot, but then I feel like that should be it. We should never talk about the sexual instinct ever again.
Sexual boy summer.
Sexual boy summer. That's a t-shirt. We have a Discord going. It's people like it. and there's a lot of chatter there. You can find all that stuff in the members area. You can get all this, and if you haven't been typed by us and you're still on the fence about your typing, you can. We have discounts for all our typing services. You can get all this information at anygrammar.com.
All right. Well, I have a YouTube channel now. It's connected to my website, Saturn Ruled 9. And I have been covering the this season of The Bachelorette. What I've been doing is just this next episode that's coming out is going to cover episode 1 and 2. But basically, I'm going through the episode and talking about the different dynamics that are covered, obviously through the lens of the Enneagram. And I've actually been in conversation with a friend about the possibility of, I know this is like a Discord heavy group, but about the possibility of starting a Discord specifically to talk about reality TV so that it's compartmentalized.
A million
Discords.
The Discord wars.
The Discord wars. Yes.
Don't
But
listen to them.
fun.
Join Josh and I's Discord.
But it sounds fun. It's been getting pretty good response so far. It's been getting pretty good engagement so far, and it's been fun for me to just be in a conversation like this.
It's very funny, and it's Alexandra is using the lens of reality TV and what she describes as like a human zoo. Talk about really actually pretty deep and interesting personality dynamics that happen in action that a lot of books and other things just aren't able to capture because they don't see people reacting to each other under that kind of pressure. So she was doing visual typing, and it was very funny, but also really good observations. And so, yeah, whatever bullshit you have about reality TV, this is actually really interesting and cool.
Yeah, and it's worth saying reality TV is just not to be watched at face value. Watching it through as just like fodder to observe dynamics that get pushed up under a certain kind of pressure cooker is a way more interesting way to view it. And that's what I'm doing, and I want more people to talk to you about. So please engage.
All right, then Josh boy, what do we got?
Yeah, what do we got?
We have an Enneagram school.
Yeah, we have the So John and I have an Enneagram school. You can check it out at theenneagramschool.com. We are, as of like a couple weeks ago, officially recognized by the state of New York as an official organization. Yeah.
We're coming for all the other schools.
We got permission from the Department of Education to use the word school in our business title.
Hell yes.
Amazing.
Yeah. So that's awesome. So we are, so it's official now, official that we're the Enneagram school. And probably, as you all know, we did our first class on like a whole developmental theory of the centers. That was in January, February, and we're cooking on some other stuff. One of which we're about to talk about today, the attachment support group. And then John and I are still talking about creating an intro to the Enneagram course. And some other stuff will be on the way. We also have a Discord. Join our Discord.
Join ours first. Don't screw any other ones.
That's right. Yeah, that Discord, I have opinions about that Discord, but we're going to have a private area.
You guys created the private area now for students only?
It's kind of fine and actually maybe dead right now. I mean, it's like, I think it'll be a lot more alive when we have classes going on that students can actually be like live interacting with each other about the content between classes and stuff. So we're going to be using it a lot. Like there is now officially a private area for paid students.
Cool.
Who've taken classes.
That was important.
And so, we had a funny incident. We cut out some riffraff, and then we also, so now the private area is going to be really good. I think that'll actually be the way for facilitating the meaningful conversations that we're hoping to actually have there.
We're only doing this attachment course to get the Discord going.
That's it.
Shut up, John. This attachment group is actually the beginning of a war that we're casting upon the hexad types.
You guys have no chance. One of us can kill 100 of you.
And the squeaky wheel is the first one to go down. So everyone say goodbye to Emeka as this is his last day on the planet.
One of me is worth like 20 at least.
There are millions of attachment types. I've just wisened up, and join the winning team.
Yes.
Me and David will wage this.
I got
together.
creamed out.
David
David is an attachment type.
He's not on your team.
You're gonna fight my own people.
He's gonna turn on you.
He's not on your team.
Yes, he is. He's just more sneaky than you think.
He's an attachment spy.
He doesn't identify as an attachment type, so you have to respect.
I'm
Well,
biologically
the fact that you're
not an
buying
attachment type.
David
the fact
has
that you're
attached
buying
into
into his non-attachment type identity means that he's doing a good job as an attachment type.
Listen,
so way to go.
he's
You fell for
a
it.
master.
Again.
He's gonna be at the front.
adapted.
He's just gonna remind you guys that you're losing the war.
God, such
Got
a big
one of-
mouth.
I'm gonna take all your hexaddy
huge
attachment types
mouth.
are gonna be playing on my team.
Keep talking, Emeka.
It's
Keep
just
talking.
gonna be Bermuda
Shut up, Emeka.
versus
Shut up. Just shut up.
everyone else.
That's enough from you. Shut up. All right. So anyway, everyone.
All
just
right.
quick-
So today we are talking about Alexandra and Josh's upcoming course. Is it officially called the Attachment Type Support Group?
Attachment support group. We had an interesting. We might be slightly rebranding it to attachment accountability group.
Oh,
But it's something like that. Something in that general direction.
Yes.
All right,
accountability.
so-
Can you explain why
Yeah, explain.
attachment types need
You're accountable to
accountability?
not adapt.
Yeah. What are you guys going to be accountable to?
Yeah. Alexandra, why why should we be doing an attachment support group?
Yes.
Accountability
Good question,
specifically.
Josh.
Accountability specifically.
Okay, we're not acknowledging Emeka on this call.
First of all, the
Did
attachment
anyone
support
else
group
have
is
a
a
question?
hexad free zone. No hexads allowed.
Hey, if David's in there, he's spying for me, so it's all good. He's hexaddy as fuck.
Yeah.
But that does raise the good. Emeka's obnoxious, existence does raise the good question, which is the first
Wow.
question.
Compliment.
Oh my God. Okay. Give me a moment.
Regroup
Yeah.
attachment types.
Yeah.
My lake is disturbed. Give me a moment.
Find your position again.
It's like 20 versus 1. That's what it takes. I destabilized hundreds of you.
Oh my God. This is going to be one of those scenes where like a billion
What is the
ants like take down a
Attachment Type
grasshopper.
Support Group.
This is what they need support for.
Speaking for themselves. That's what they need help.
Finding their voice.
Okay. So,
Ready? Go.
okay. Yeah. So the first question is, why does an attachment support group need to exist? What do attachment types need support in? And just if we're going to put that / accountability piece in there too, why do attachment types need accountability, and accountability to what specifically? There are a billion ways we could approach this, but I think if we're going to respond to the accountability piece first, then attachment types need to learn to be accountable for themselves. Not to anyone else necessarily, but to themselves, learn how to honor themselves in a way where they can carry their location into different environments and still be accountable for their own locations, for their own outcomes. And the way this is going to be done is by unwrapping and revealing a lot of different mechanisms that goes on in the attachment type structure.
Can you, remember Lucy's critique that we just kind of dive into heavy concepts.
Mm-hmm.
So can you kind of paint a brief picture of attachment and what types those are, and what you mean by location and accountability and all that kind of stuff? Like, why would attachment type specifically need some kind of accountability to themselves that, this hexad thing is whatever, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think we're actually going to start with a lot of Josh's model. So, Josh, do you want to start with this?
Sure.
Just loosely defining what attachment is and how it strays from itself.
Yeah. So attachment. Wow, it's funny to just dive into what attachment is. It's such a big concept. So One way of thinking about attachment. The word attachment is not in relation to what is very popular these days, attachment theory. It's actually a kind of adjacent theory called object relations, which is a branch of psychology that deals with how the imprints of your early childhood relationships carry into adulthood. And there are three basic object relational patterns: attachment, frustration, and rejection. Object relations is not like a single monolithic theory. It's sort of like a lot of different theorists have contributed to it over time. And we've been kind of unpacking, sort of starting from, I think Don Riso and Russ Hudson kind of started mapping the attachment, frustration, and rejection patterns to the Enneagram types. And we've discovered as a group over the last couple of years our own distinctions, and have kind of burrowed all the way through to the bottom of object relations theory, and kind of discovered some new stuff swimming into like way at the bottom there.
Way near the Titanic.
Yeah, near the Titanic. So, and attachment is the most common of the three object relational patterns. And maybe actually one of the pieces of context is that all three object relational patterns are the way that we deal with misses of some kind of attunement in our environment. So like when we're wanting mom to look at us, but she's not looking at us, or when we're wanting to be fed, but we're not getting fed, or when, or even if, later as we're older, if we think something is true and then someone else says that it's not true or gives us contradictory information, there's a kind of a miss there. Like, how do I, you understand? There's a miss from the point of view of figuring out how do I know what's up and down around here. So object relations has to do with how we navigate misses, and attachment, frustration, rejections are three ways of doing that. How much context should I keep? Is this useful?
This is great.
Just
I think just talk about 9, 3, and 6. Just a little bit of a brief thing.
So, in brief, so 9 being a body type, we think that that 9 is attaching to something that we're calling the holding environment, which is basically like the gestalt of your sensory impressions as you move through life. That is an entire, like a whole book could be written about what that means. But there's basically a way that 9s are settling into certain kinds of life grooves that are worthy of investigation, because they might not be serving the 9, or they might be helping the 9 continue to be asleep, and they might be kind of comforting and numbing the 9 as opposed to helping them kind of like engage with their life. So
what you're saying here is that part of attachment is getting into a certain kind of groove to get your needs met unconsciously.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that 9's doing that through the body center for the sake of getting the right kind of holding, right?
Yeah, and maybe a useful thing to say here is, because we've been talking about attachment versus hexad. So we refer to both frustration and rejection as hexad types, and attachment is its own kind of thing. And that's visually represented on the Enneagram, where the attachment types are on the triangle and the hexad types are actually on that weird hexagonal figure that looks kind of like a spider.
1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7, 1.
Right. So one of the main differences between attachment types and hexad types is that attachment types are fundamentally reflexively adapting to their environments and in some ways abandoning themselves to adapt to the environment, whereas the hexad types are doing the opposite as a reflex. They're locating themselves, they're discovering and knowing themselves and inhabiting themselves in opposition to the environment. So attachment types are doing that in various ways, but 9 doing that from the point of view of the body center is kind of like adapting to the holding that they're getting from the environment. 3, we think, are adapting to the way that people are seeing them. So we have this term gaze, which is like just, the way I'm being seen. What is valued around here. 3s will adapt themselves to get the most positive gaze. And 6s, we think, are adapting to something that we're calling the field of orientation. So external orientation, serving as a kind of anchor point to help me figure out my way around here, basically like assembling a map of the world and making sense of things using other people's maps, as opposed to discovering my own inner guidance. So those are the three distinct forms of attachment in the body center, the heart center, and the mental center.
And so y'all have been, I mean, us collectively, but then y'all in particular have been noticing and identifying patterns that 9, 3, and 6 do, and ways they kind of abandon themselves to try to get the holy environment or the right kind of gaze or the right kind of orientation. And that ends up setting up a lot of problems for themselves. And because these types are really common, they're the most common types. It creates a lot of kind of confusing and conflicting dynamics, intrapersonally and interpersonally, right? So, like, I've talked with both of y'all about just different things you're seeing, and so kind of like, when you talk about like accountability to yourself from the point of view of attachment, like, what does that mean?
Well, I mean, a different way to look at attachment that I think has been discussed, and we definitely plan to discuss it within the group and really spell it out and map it out and give a lot of examples on how this shows up, is between the 3 object relations. Attachment is the object relational style that doesn't give up on the original source. It doesn't accept the failure of the parental sources. So I am not, I'll speak for myself just as an example. Like, I have not given up on the moms everywhere that I can pick up on seeing me correctly, on my environments holding me correctly, on my guiding sources guiding and orienting me correctly. And what happens when this, and what happens when I get a dose of holding or orienting or seeing that feels good, is my entire orientation. Then I shouldn't use the word orientation. My entire aim and motivation becomes keeping it. And it becomes keeping it. And then if I feel it, if I feel any center, I'm triple attachment. So I have all 3 of them. So we can, and so is Josh. So we can just use these blanket statements for both of us. We're attached to all 3. So when we get one of these sources, gaze, holding, or orientation that feels good, that feels correct, that feels like it's really matched, even in a moment, we attach to it. And what that means is that if I feel those sources straying, and we're both social types too, so the way that this is going to come across is it's going to feel like a social bond. We're going to feel like connection, and that can look like whatever. That's besides the point. What happens when these sources feel like they're being at risk, or when they feel like they're straying or something like that, when I, with a 6 fix feels like there's something that could be potentially threatening to it, my style is to modify my behavior in order to keep that source. And so what happens in this is that my focus is no longer on myself and my like individual needs. It solely becomes a mission of making sure that I still have that source. Okay. And part of the attachment comes in is like, I will modify my behavior in order to keep it. And as a 9, and Josh can speak to his experience as a 3, but as a 9, what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue shrinking myself. I'm going to continue erasing my own preferences, erasing my own reactions in order to fit into the field of like comfort that has felt good at one point. Because if I keep it, then I tell myself, or the attachment pattern tells itself that that source will open up to its full satisfaction again.
So what you're saying is that as an attachment type, you get some kind of holding, gaze, orientation that feels really good. It feels like it matches. And then even if that goes away, the attachment, the connection, so to speak, is put in place. And then the personality organizes around trying to keep it or open it to its fuller potential.
Yeah.
And so how conscious of doing this are you as how conscious are attachment types generally about doing this? And how conscious is this sense of adapting? Because I think a lot of people don't like to admit that they adapt.
I mean, it's very automatic. I mean, it's going to be all 3 object relational styles are so automatic. We don't necessarily recognize that that's what's happening. And attachment is no exception to that. I'm modifying myself in micro ways that I don't realize I'm doing until at least my like tell is usually my anger response, or like a building of resentment or something like that. And it is usually when that feeling, when like anger gets to a certain point, that I recognize that I've been trying to fit myself into a field of like preconceived satisfaction. That's usually my tell that I've strayed from what is feeling good at the moment.
One thing that is common, I think, with a lot of attachment types is a story of like waking up after years of being in a particular kind of zone or groove of life, and then just being like, whoa, like where have I been, or what was I thinking, or the sense emerges that I've not been myself.
Yeah. How did I get here?
Yeah. And I've had like a couple of like major moments like that where it's like, oh my God, whoa. Like I've really, like the last couple of years were, and I had, even if, in a period of years, I have little moments of awakening where I'm like, oh yeah, like, wow, I've like come back to myself. There'll be moments where I realize that the underlying entire last 3 years was in some way a form of self-abandonment. You see? For example, I found, and this is, it's hard to talk about 9, 3, and 6 separately when it comes to just me, my personal story, because I have all three of those on my Trifix. But like living in New York, I've found that a lot of times that my pattern has been to like not really build my own social world. Like I've like when I moved to New York, I moved in with roommates, and then I moved in with another roommate after that, and I sort of just very easily merge in to other people's social environments. And like I've had over the course of my life, probably like a dozen or more like friend groups that I've just become a member of that were already established. You understand? And it's because of just happenstance. Like I happened to live in a place where they already had a friend group, and then I just all of a sudden was like a part of them. And then I moved to another, and there's been a constant delaying of, we use this word a lot with respect to attachment, individuation, which is discovering who, quote unquote, I really am. And there's an ongoing project for me of discerning what have I absorbed into my world that isn't actually mine, or that it wasn't my choice, and what is mine, what's arising from me, what's not arising from me. So attachment types tend to live accidentally, unconsciously from the outside in, as opposed to the inside out. And then the project of discovering who I really am and living from the inside out is actually very, very hard. And just a silly example that was actually really hard was moving into my own place in New York, choosing to come back to New York after some time away during the pandemic. Like it took me months and months and months before I got any furniture, because I didn't even know what my own taste was.
Wow.
And so I had to discover, like, what do I want? What do I like? And then there was the terror of, what if I choose something and I don't like it? That was just it took a very long time, to make simple choices like that. And I mean, gosh, like I could almost tell you any story from my life and pull out an attachment theme from it. But this idea, John, your question of what are attachment types being accountable to? Why is accountability a good word? Because attachment types are not conscious of the way that in the moment they have absorbed something that isn't their choice, that they have attached and are adapting into an environment that isn't necessarily their choice, that's not coming from them. And again, it's okay to do that. It's okay to have friends, obviously, but like, are they the friends that you want? It's okay to have furniture apartment. Is it the furniture you want? It's okay to have, you know what I'm saying? Like, so
absolutely.
The discovering and the inhabiting and like the actually populating your life with stuff that is your own choice, your own flavor, is a thing that particularly Bermuda types, 936 Trifix has a very difficult time with. But on some level in each of the centers, all three attachment types are doing that.
And, so in your example of having a difficulty finding furniture, I think a lot of people probably wouldn't, even if they are afflicted by that kind of a conflict or situation or difficulty, probably wouldn't relate to it. But tell me if this is right, that oftentimes attachment types will have preferences, like I know what furniture I want, but it's often in reference to something else right? Like maybe like a subculture they feel affinity for, or something, some kind of other thing, but it won't their own particular unique taste can have difficulty accessing. Is that correct?
Yeah, and then a very interesting thing can also happen where, as attachment types are waking up to the ways in which they've been over attaching into whatever like universal or like subculture it's kind of like the question of, how do I even know if this subculture is my choice?
Right. Yeah.
Like we aren't born in a vacuum. And like, for example, John, as a 4, like you have a very particular aesthetic taste, and you have like
Yes,
tattoos on
I
your
do.
body that are like referenced from inside. However, you've also been influenced in certain ways, but you have, because you're a 4.
Not true. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
He's
so
not kidding.
but there's an interesting like way that even in the midst of like in a field of influence, there's a way that you're reflexively rejecting influence, right? And then kind of discovering your own thing. Attachment is just basically the opposite of that. It's like reflexively absorbing influence and then delaying discovering the inner thing.
So in terms of an attachment type support group, what would that entail? What would you be doing together? What would you be like? How would it look? And how would you be helping or supporting attachment types? And yeah, what would that look like?
Well, even before that, there's another kind of way that I want to put. John, you asked the question, or you posed the idea that an attachment type wouldn't, and it's true. A lot of attachment types that are attachment types are not identified with, like, I don't know where I stand at a given moment. And I think part of the mechanism of attachment is this extreme ease and flexibility with being able to take on new things and work with them with a lot of competence. Like I can put myself in new environments and flow through them fucking so easily. It is not difficult for me to take on things that are not coming from within me and be able to work with it. Where attachment has to learn to come back to itself is Josh and I have been kind of playing with the image of like a toy that stretches a lot, or maybe I just mentioned whatever, like a toy that can really stretch. Like it can bend in this way and it can stretch all the way out this way. And that's just its ability. It has this ability to move in all of these different directions, to take on different shapes, blah, 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 blah. And it does it with ease. It's not going to break it. It's not going to harm it, anything like that. But what will be harmful is if the toy gets so stretched out that it doesn't know its original form that it comes back to. And so a lot of what this group is going to be the process of uncovering what has been a stretch versus what is like the original form that we're supposed to come back to. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What's
So
your
that's
shape?
gonna be-
What's your
Yes, your
shape?
shape.
Your shape.
Yes, that's right. Because attachment is, its gift is to be flexible. Its gift is to be able to take on things that other types are too sensitive and honestly too rigid to be able to handle. An attachment type has all three of them. In all three centers, we have this enormous ability to be able to work with what is in front of us, whether or not it has come from an internal place or not. We can still move through it. So the risk that gets posed is that we don't cleanse ourselves of what we have adapted to the point where we forget what our original form is. And so the reason attachment types can say, like, oh, that doesn't happen to me. I actually do like, I don't know, the color pink. I like the color pink. It can be confused with like, yes, I took on the color pink and it is a nice color and I know how to work with it. But is it my favorite? Is it my favorite color? Like, I think what attachment types do a lot of is it confuses the ability to manage something effectively with preference.
Oof.
Damn.
Oof. That's good.
Wow, that was good. Yeah.
Thank you.
So
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I just so the group is to help each other identify what the original form is and sort of like, I guess, you catch each other in the act of betraying that.
Yes. The group is also a place. I'd be fascinated to hear if either of our hexad boys relate to the need for this. But it's a place to come and share. And as you're sharing, like there's going to be a lot of open space in the group for people to just share. We're going to have some content to teach, but it's a group, and the group is for is there to collectively witness you as you share, and discover in real time who you are. And there is power in the witnessing of a group, for that, especially if the group's intention is to help you sense deeper into your own truth, as opposed to a group that exists as something that you're attaching into. You understand?
Right.
Yeah.
So, most social groups just exist in whatever dynamic they naturally sort of go into, and then the pace of conversation is set by the assertive types, and the topics are set by whoever just wants to jump in and say something. So a facilitated group that has space and whose stated function is to help you see yourself and to be a part of a group that is helping to see other people, that itself is a powerful environment to discover yourself, to individuate.
Yeah.
And I'll just say one other thing, like my whole personal Enneagram and self-discovery story, at least one major chapter of it began in a context like this, where I was living in St. Louis, and I attended my first ever Enneagram retreat, which was facilitated very skillfully by an organization called the Ejikari Unlearning Institute. Shout out. But it was just like a 12-person group in this guy's house, and it was just very beautiful. And it was the first time that I ever felt meaningfully psychologically safe to admit certain ways that I had betrayed myself as a 3. And like that was the first time I ever admitted things like, cheating in academia and things like that I've now like gone through a whole process with. But there aren't really spaces, and our culture doesn't really train us to be able to witness each other in a way that can help our souls really emerge. And attachment types need that, because without that kind of a space, there isn't a container in which their soul can feel safe enough to like peek out. So that's what this is.
So one of the things I'm hearing y'all speak to is that in a certain way, attachment types have a lot of superpowers. They're able to really witness people and hold people and mirror them, and to provide holding and all those kind of things. But they're often not encouraged to do that for themselves. And so it sounds like in this, not only are they being encouraged to do that for themselves together, with like witnessing and accountability, but also I think that those so-called superpowers are stronger, and they're more able to flourish and be what they are. Like you can't truly mirror somebody unless you're able to hold yourself too. Right. You can't just be a perfect mirror. And so it sounds like it could be a beautiful experience to, find and locate those kind of abilities that detachment types naturally have and naturally put attention into, and cultivating the other end of that pole to not only make those gifts more powerful, but to find like the roots of those powers in themselves that is actually of themselves and not just a function of the relationship. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes, totally. Yes, this goes back to the original attachment structure being a sort of refusal to see that the original sources have failed them. That is the reason attachment is always reaching out. That's the reason the attachment story is that the correct gaze, the correct holding, the correct orientation, the correct parenting is coming from outside of themselves. So what we're going to be trying to do in this group is, first of all, allow people to share their own examples. And this is going to serve a purpose that I think is really important, because a lot of attachment, the function of attachment, or at least like a byproduct of it, is that it really operates off of a lot of modeling. Like a lot of what happens is modeling. So I think creating and cultivating an environment where people are sharing is going to model to other attachment types that can be done. It's going to model to other attachment types examples that maybe they relate to, that maybe will give them permission to open up and like acknowledge that within themselves. And then, of course, that's going to be a sort of step one. And then with the ultimate aim to move into a process to redirect that parenting to come from within themselves, to be their own sources of holding, to be their own sources of gaze, to be their own sources of orientation. but also if they are still accepting it from an external place, to recognize that that is an autonomous choice that they're making,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to
A reflex.
as
or a-
opposed to what? As opposed to a reflex. To really, it should be an empowerment
Mm.
process.
Mm-hmm.
There's also one other thing I'll say about that is I think that there's a meaningful growing up process that attachment types are being invited into, which is like, what does it mean to hold yourself? I mean, from a practical standpoint, but from a psychological standpoint, in order to get to a place where you can hold yourself, you have to grieve the truth that the environment isn't going to hold you in the way that you've been hoping that it would. And so you have to create that for yourself. That can be, so it's very beautiful to awake into yourself. It also can be very painful. Yeah.
That was going to be my next question, because, the grief, right? Like the awakening is also a grieving process, that shattering delusions is really painful. And, not to act like this is all an attachment thing, like frustration, rejection have a false unity brought about by the sort of singularness of frustration and attachment. But frustration and rejection. But attachment has a more pronounced multiplicity, Gurdjieff says many eyes. We all have many eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that manifests a lot more explicitly in attachment types, whereas frustration and rejection can kind of flatten those many eyes artificially.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that process of bringing this disparate selves together, and what you said, Josh, about waking up after years of somehow leaning out of your own inner integrity or your own location or your own autonomy, is very painful and very full of grief. And so how do you have a sense of how you're going to work with grief, or how it's going to be held, or anything like that?
Yeah. I mean, I could talk about it from like a facilitation standpoint.
Yeah, I think that's good.
A lot of times what grief really needs is just to be met and witnessed and allowed space. Grief, the terror of grief is that you feel like it won't have a lifespan, and then it will change your life. And but it's just acknowledging that it's here. And especially in a group context where you can bet that other people are going to relate. Other people have experienced that, or will be on the verge of experiencing it. So there's a certain magic in group dynamics like this where when grief arises, it opens up the entire heart space of the group.
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of like popcorn, everyone just like opens.
Mm-hmm.
You'd asked a question about, or side question about how John and I might relate to this sort of need for a group. And it made me think that for hexad types, that, at least for me, the sort of tapping into sort of like this group intelligence or group attachment thing by working with these guys and, building connections. And there's this like assumption that it's all on me. Like my whole world is contained in my perspective, my ability to move. And so to be able to find some co-creative, codependent, everything in the stuff that I'm really interested in has been like a very transformative step to sort of like, I'm not just going to do it myself. I'm going to do it with my friends that I really enjoy doing things with. Like, I can discover things in collaboration in real time. I don't have to just go off by myself and do it alone. I can see myself through engagement with others that, and so that it seems like, I'm discovering attachment. I'm discovering the flexibility that comes from taking in something that I initially said no to and eventually integrating it, or discovering things through other people, even discovering things about myself and expanding how I see myself through other people. Because the reflex is just like, no, I got to go find it myself. I got to go do it for myself. I've got to go create it for myself. And so it's been interesting to experience the opposite end of things, that, okay, this is what attachment types are doing overdoing all the time, but like you can't really have a relationship where if you don't have some ability to do both.
Yeah, I mean, this is my hexad type support group. This has
Yeah,
been
right.
it. You know, like, I mean, really,
Absolutely.
the lifespan of this podcast has been like discovering ways that I actually wasn't as isolated as I thought, which has been a good thing and a bad thing. You
Right.
know, like Josh, you know, uses the term splinters. Like,
Mhm.
I had a lot more splinters in me than I realized, and that like has caused a lot of grief and a lot of whatever. And then learning how to expand and open in the right way. And, you know, like I know that Emeka and I, you know, we've had a lot of like, I think Emeka's put words to it more of like, oh, this person's helping me see myself, you know, and I think that's more like your orientation of having your heart center as not as, you know, it isn't 8, you know, it's not, you know, whatever.
Right.
But for me, it's like, it's kind of been that way, but in like a body center boundary, social instinct mix way.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's been a thing. So anyway, yeah, that's my end of it.
Can you say more? Can you say more about the splinters? Can you elaborate what that means?
Yeah, well, there's a certain there's a way in which things were impacting me in ways I didn't recognize, and there are ways that I was trying to control things, like my boundaries, control my relationships in ways to not be affected in certain ways. And I was kind of like my back in a corner and having a very like kind of protected corner, thinking I was not touched or needed to be touched or whatever. You know, it's like there's multiple layers where there was ways I thought I was defending against certain things, and ways I thought I was guiding things in another way. And there's been a recognition of how the mechanisms of my control over myself and my environment were misguided and actually harmed me. And so a splinter is like a way thing is actually affecting me, and I'm either trying to control it, avoid it, deny it, or fix it in a way that's actually not, that actually doesn't make sense, right? It's like actually not a fix, like putting some kind of Band-Aid over something.
And partly what you're saying is that in a way, a somewhat attachment modality actually could resolve some of that, like.
For sure, yeah. Like,
right.
especially, you know, in my past, if I just gone with a more, let's see where this goes, let's see how this is, let's see how this is, instead of going, I already know how everything I want and need, and this is how it's going to be.
Right.
If I was just like more vulnerable in certain ways and more open, more exploratory, especially in terms of interpersonal relationships, and just like, yeah, not so like singular.
Right.
I think I would have saved myself a lot of grief. So yeah, that's my hexad version.
Yeah, I mean, like I think of attachment as soup, right? And so splinters is the opposite of soup. You know? Individual, non-mergy little sharp pieces.
Yeah, that's excellent. The splinter idea came from the idea that a rejection types have a wall, and then a splinter is something that just like a sharp object that gets through without their permission. You know, like a 2 putting up a rejection against gaze wall, and then somebody sees the 2 in a way that doesn't conform to their self-image, and it's like, fuck, you know, like when you get a splinter, and then they have a whole histrionic reaction. But in a soup, it's like somebody could see me. It's like whatever shard would have penetrated the 2 and like been really painful, just like enters the soup and becomes part of it. You know?
Solves.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like being in a submersible deep in the water, and you can kind of just see the different colors and shapes outside of your porthole. And they all just, you know, and then sometimes the Titanic comes into view.
The splinter of the iceberg.
Exactly. I couldn't have said it better myself.
Nintendo controller. Malfunctioned.
So something I want to say in regards to the group as well too is there's a lot of conversation and a lot of a lot of conversations that we've engaged in that talks about the aim of attachment being individuation, to come to a localized point of preference and, emotional identification and blah, 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 blah. And while those are, I think part of our aim with the attachment support group is to aim to find those locations in moments, and is to aim to find that individuation, as I said earlier, as like, what is the original shape that you take on before what is the original shape that you have before you start to stretch in all of these different directions? That is the location. But I want to make sure that it's clear that this is different from the sort of attachment becoming like a localized point that loses its flexibility. The aim is to be able to give attachment types the tools to come back to your original shape, to let go of the ways that you've stretched out, to forces that have come in, to recalibrate, and to like to cleanse yourself of all of these different, forces that you've been working with and experimenting with and playing with and facilitating and stuff like that. Come back to your original place so that you can get ready to do it again if that's what you choose to do.
So this is not attachment types need to be like hexad types.
Right.
This is not. Yes, I think that's very important to.
So
and we haven't been. We need this. There's definitely more exploration to be done on this, but it is no accident that the Enneagram itself is one triangle and then a hexad. It's not three triangles. Like, it's not attachment and frustration and rejection. It is attachment and hexad. So I think that is like a very important thing to emphasize, that the attachment journey is not actually to find like an individuated point where their abilities stop being their abilities. It is to continue to come back to like their original form in order to be able to use their powers for whatever direction they're going to point it in.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Totally. We were, Alexandra and I were hanging out with our friends Jason and Amara this weekend, and they're big in the Gurdjieff stuff. And they were talking about a certain interpretation of the process Enneagram, and how at the 9, 3, and 6 points, when you're applying the Enneagram process to like an organization, basically like the hexad points represent these different stages in the mechanism of the way things flow within an organization or within a process. But those things only really flow and work when the 9, 3, 6 points are filled in, those shock points. Those are, those are called shock points or intervals in this thing, where information or qualities from the outside moves in and out of the system in a fluid, flowing kind of a way. And so when those arenas are naturally just given the right quality, the rest of the whole Enneagram process starts to flow. And so there's something, I don't exactly know what that would mean in terms of typology, but there's something that struck me about the intelligence of there being so many attachment types, and how important attachment types, everybody's work, but especially attachment types work is, because it's kind of like, I feel like attachment types are the ones that are going to lift up other attachment types. Yeah, that's like, I don't know, there's something there. And so I also want to just add that like Alexandra and Josh are great teachers, and that I think that there's nobody better equipped to do something like this, because, I mean, those are the two folks I'm probably spending the most physical time with. And, like all their examples and stories and like ways they've genuinely suffered and learned from their suffering and made mistakes, and then come back and like really seen the architecture of their own patterns is very profound. And they both have a really strong quality to see what's happening in other people, often far more than the person sees what's going on in themselves. And I think that is an attachment gift. And so I think that Alexandra and Josh are going to be amazing facilitators of this. And also to add, we kind of had, this is like kind of a heavy talk, right? Like this kind of discussion is sort of heavy, because whenever we're getting into the object relation affect, that's where all of our suffering and our mistakes come from. And from talking with them and from my sense of them and all, and just hearing them talk about the course, like I think it'll also be kind of fun and interesting too, you know, and it kind of be funny. Like it's not just this sort of solemn, like let's be accountable, everybody,
Right.
kind of a thing. Like
Right.
you know, it's going to be very human, but I think you know, since we're focusing on why attachment types might need collective attachment support, it does have more of a heavy quality.
Yeah, I love that you just named that. Thanks for everything you said about us too. But the grief part or the heaviness piece. Yeah, it's funny. Well, like when you wade into this territory, there's a sense of like a reverence for the delicate, like the fragility, you know, of this material. Because this is very tender psychological material. And as you unpack it and as you start working with it, then it does actually become very like a levity emerges, but it as you wade in, it has this kind of solemn thing. So yeah, I was thinking it'd be interesting to talk about just a little bit of like structural stuff, like how it's going to work.
I want to,
Yeah.
format
Yeah.
and stuff. Yeah.
And then some of the topics, I'll just like bullet point some of the topics that we're
Yeah.
gonna
Also,
cover.
like when and what the logistics
we'll get
are
into
and the
that.
cost and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Right. So we're thinking it's going to be 8 weeks. It's going to be like a 2-hour session. It's probably I think at like 6:30 Eastern. And this is a prototype for something that we hope to potentially repeat in different formats down the line. Maybe even like a live retreat kind of version of it will happen at some point. But we're going to keep it on Zoom for now. And
It's going to be recorded.
It's going. Ooh, that's a good question. Probably
I think
not actually.
Yeah,
What do you think, Alex? Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably.
I think it's possible that the like pedagogical parts, you know, the
Yeah.
teaching aspects could be recorded. That's where it's still in talks, but because we plan for this to be a really intimately revealing place, it will definitely not be recorded. Those parts
Yeah.
will not be.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's going to be like we're going to front load it with some basic theoretical orientation to what is attachment in the context of object relations, a little bit of more textured, fleshed out version of what I said in the beginning of this podcast. And also there's going to be a class where we kind of talk about like set up the structure of each individual of attachment type. So class on 9, class on 3, class on 6. But really it's going to be mostly open space for people to share. There's going to be a huge emphasis on the rules of engagement. So like how we show up to this place and how we create the social container in which these attachment patterns can be safely explored. That's a huge, huge deal. If anybody's interested, one of my favorite thinkers on the topic is Parker Palmer, who has a thing called the Center for Courage and Renewal. And he facilitates circles of trust. And so I've been very influenced by him and the way that we think about creating these kinds of spaces. And then there's also going to be things like poems and songs to evoke kind of more subterranean right brain kind of material that won't just be kind of left brain lecture stuff. So yeah, we'll kind of like massaging the inner world a little bit to like let things surface from underneath the soil.
Good.
Yeah. We do plan to have themes, and it'll kind of be at our discretion and almost at that it'll be new ideas and themes will be added in as needed. But there are plans to address certain like dynamic themes that come up with the attachment mechanism, as for example, like ways that we self-betray, ways that we operate out of a need for reciprocity, ways that attachment can be manipulative and controlling even. I do think that this, and you know, Josh and I are kind of still in conversation about some of these aspects, but we seem to agree that the aim is going to be a kind of 3-part process, which one is to just direct, to identify what needs to be extracted. And then a big like bloodletting piece, like where we're just going to let it out, identify it, talk about it, all within the hopes of recalibrating by the end, so that everybody's ready to just go back out into the world with a new sense of where they're operating from. There's something else I was going to add into that. Oh, that the rules of engagement, I feel like I want to emphasize that a little bit more, because I think a lot of times when attachment types enter group spaces like this, part of our mechanism is to be hypersensitive to what we are supposed to be doing, how we are supposed to be showing up, what we are expected to answer. the tone that we're expected to answer with, stuff like that. So Josh and I are being very careful about setting up rules of engagement so that the environment stays very absent of these micro directions that attachment types can attach to and perform for. So a lot of this is if somebody shares, there's our specific rules around not telling that person what they're doing, but asking questions to invite what they're doing out of them autonomously.
Cool.
Attachment is it's sneaky, so it has to be approached delicately.
Very cool.
Yeah. I have a couple other things to share. I want to just name a couple of like headliner topics that we've been kind of excavating.
Yeah, good idea.
That will be explored. So one is this really interesting. We've been exploring the unconscious expectation of reciprocity in relationship that attachment types have. So that's kind of one big topic. Another topic is what it means to be living from a place of obligation versus inspiration.
Can you say a little something about what that means?
Yeah, one way attachment types maintain their pattern is by an unconscious obligation to keep things the way they are, or like not to disturb other people, or to
be performing to a certain standard that they've placed on themselves.
That's right.
Assumed about themselves.
Yes. Yeah. And so all that comes from a certain kind of it's a certain premature framing of where my life energy is supposed to go, based on values that I've absorbed from other people or something like that, as opposed to letting the fountain just flow. And so what does it really mean how do you be yourself? What does that really mean? One way to frame it is you're sort of like discovering the inner fountain of actual inspiration. Where does your life energy actually want to flow? What are you actually interested in? What are your actual those kinds of things? So, and there's a lot more texture in that space. Oh, a really interesting one is being others equal, where the the attachment thing is on some level in each sensor holding a certain sense that like the environment will provide this for me, or I want the environment to provide it for me, which is asserting a certain kind of status relationship. Like I like the environment has something that I would need and want, and therefore I must adapt myself to it. And so being others equal, like the relationships that you're in, that you find yourself attaching into, where you have that sense that you're not really being yourself in that relationship. One way to explore that is through a certain kind of, what attachment needs are being met in that relationship? What's the unconscious status dynamic that you're kind of locked into, and what would it mean to really be this person's equal? So, okay, so that's a good teaser. I also just want to mention that part of the whole, like, this is a sort of like, let's discover also what's healthy about attachment as well. I mean, we have to get through all this, like, what is the shadow of attachment, because it's very hard to pin down, because of the nature of attachment being so soupy, as David said. But I think on the other side of it, like, attachment is like, what's cool about it? What's cool about being flexible? What's cool about being adaptable? Why? What is there to celebrate about it? And in particular, I just want to make this point so explicit, is like this community, and this podcast has this kind that we're in has a very hexad forward kind of value system, and a lot of attachment types are attaching into that, as a sense of like, oh, my attachment, like my project now is to individuate and basically become more hexad-like.
Hexad, right.
Yeah. And so that itself is an attachment pattern, you see. So people who are like diehard fans of the community, so that wants to be explored.
Yeah, that individuation for an attachment is maintaining its adaptation, its ability to adapt, its mutability, its flexibility. But what does it mean to do that in a way that feels autonomous and like like a real decision versus just a reflex and a response to outer forces that feels stronger.
Mm-hmm. All right. So do you have is it weekly? You meet weekly?
Oh, yeah. It'll be weekly for 8 weeks.
Well, something to also say is that because of like the nature, like the energetic nature, the emotional nature, the mental nature of what we plan to be doing, it is going to be a limited capacity.
Okay.
Yes.
We are going to cap it at a certain amount of people. So this is not going to just be open fully to the public. We plan to do really intimate work here. So it is going to be limited. I think every time that it's done. Yeah.
How many people are you thinking would be a good number?
I think 12.
Oh.
Oh, wow.
All right. That's serious.
Yeah.
That's great.
Wow. And then I had another question. Where can people go to sign up or find information? Is it the Enneagram School?
That's a good question. Yeah. The EnneagramSchool.com will have a page on it that will be easy. It will be easy to find. Go to the EnneagramSchool.com and you will see the information and you can sign up there.
Josh is going to make it in 30 minutes flat after this podcast.
3 powers.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist yet, but it will.
Yeah,
by this
we have
podcast.
we have the flyer. We'll just need the link, and I think by the time this comes out, we can maybe put this in like the show notes or something, so that by the time this comes out, it'll be up and live already.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well,
all right.
Josh, was there anything else you wanted to say about we could just like clip it in, or do you feel finished?
I guess I'll just say this kind of a space is like such a big deal. Like I really cannot emphasize how transformative this kind of an experience was for me in my life, and how it became for years like an oasis that I would return to. That was like very, very, very important to me. So like that community that I learned the Enneagram, where I went to that first class, did a lot more work in that community in similar spaces like this, and I'm really excited to do more stuff like this with the Enneagram School because I mean it just had such an impact on me. So yeah, I mean I don't know, I have a real sense of like I take this very seriously, you know. I have like a real sense of reverence for it.
Yeah, and similarly I have a kind of opposite orientation to it, where I feel like I'm doing some like past healing almost through this. So I feel very passionate about what we're working on here, because this feels like this kind of attention that we hope to provide feels like the kind of attention that would have saved me from a lot of heartache, and would have really kept me calibrated in a way that I think I needed. So Josh and I have a lot of fire behind this. We have a lot of passion behind it. We're very excited, and we hope you guys join us. I think it's going to be really, really good and really important.
Amen.
Cool. All right.
Right, yeah.
All right, guys.
Yeah,
all right,
I guess I'll see you all on Thursday.
All right. Okay.
Cool.
See you soon.
Yep. Later.
Bye, guys.
Bye.